know if you've seen these stories the last few days. China's economy, it ain't what it used to be.
It's in trouble.
So what does that mean for the balance of the world? Professor Grossman, author of Drones and Terrorism at the University of Illinois. We love him. We don't want to be in his class, and he won't let us. And let's talk to him about it because he knows stuff. And, at least we can make him tell us here. Good morning, Professor. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. And it's not me that won't let you in the class. It's the university.
Yeah, it's funny,
maybe you know someone who can change that.
When I was a kid, my father...
I might, yeah.
My father worked at Cornell University for years, and when I was a kid, they had this, you could go to Cornell basically for free. Mm-hmm. And I remember my mom going, you could go to Cornell. And I said, Mom, they have to let you in.
Yeah.
You can't just show up.
Yeah.
There's some paperwork you have to file.
Once you get past the name, they're like, Steve Cochran?
We'll have to talk about these grades.
Yeah.
All right, so look, money determines everything in one form or another. So if China's economy is soft, that means one thing. If China's economy is trending poorly, that means another. How do you read this?
It looks pretty bad, but possibly contained. So China seems to be having a couple of problems hitting at once. And one of them is a real estate bubble that might be even bigger than the one that we had here in 2008, 2009, that popped then. And that's because China has long since thrown a lot of money into construction. Anytime there's some economic problem, like the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, they put a lot of money in investment, a lot of money in construction. They lower interest rates. They encourage people to buy apartments, and they did tons of that. And they seem to have reached the limit of that and have a lot of stuff that is half constructed or not occupied or that people were trying to flip and that isn't working. But the good side for at least the rest of the world is that most of this seems to be contained in China. So whereas our big real estate bubble, there were investors from all around the world, and there was also a big bubble in Europe, and there were all those financial products that derivatives, and that made it much bigger. And with China, it seems like they've mostly borrowed from themselves. So the overall fallout should hopefully be limited, but China seems to be having some pretty serious economic problems.
I remember those not abandoned cities, but ghost cities that were built all over China. There were malls and giant high-rise buildings and things that the presumption was would be occupied by the youth of China as they moved up and prospered in the system that remain ghost cities. Is that part of the real estate problem?
That's a big part of it. And that's also a good example of the downside of when you have a central government that is not quite communist, but still intervening very heavily in the economy and directing things. And so you don't have real estate investors saying, oh, I bet I could make money by building this building. You have instead a government saying, go build this entire city. And then if people don't move there, then it doesn't work. And China's youth has now a 20-something% unemployment. And the best way to describe that is it's bad enough that China stopped releasing the data about 3 months ago.
Professor Grossman, could this actually bolster the U.S. economy in that we might start relying less on imports?
Probably not, in that the U.S. sells stuff to China, the U.S. buys stuff from China, and if there's Chinese money that invests in the U.S. and also in economies the U.S. works with, countries that are closer to China, Australia, Japan, South Korea, have good economic relationships with the U.S. So it's not really a case where, say, Chinese exports will collapse and then American ones can just come in and replace them. It'll probably just be an economic drain on a lot of people.
So if you look at the world I grew up in, and Andre, you remember this from the 80s as well, that there's the Cold War standoff had continued. Yeah. And the Cold War standoff was the Russians have these many nukes, and we've got this many nukes, and the world could be wiped out one way or another. Well, it seems that we have sort of a Cold War with China when it comes to debt. China holds a ton of American debt. But don't we hold almost an equal amount of money leverage over them?
In a way, but that's still because it's Chinese holding American debt. So you might have heard the cliche about if I owe you $1,000, I have a problem. If I owe you $10 million, you have a problem. And it's a similar situation with China and U.S. debt, so that China has so much U.S. savings that, or U.S. debt in its savings, that if they then went and, say, sold a whole bunch of it, it would hurt their economy a lot as well as ours.
All right, so it's a linchpin sort of thing. It's not, point being, it's not something they can hold over our head as a primary threat.
Right.
Okay, well, I can live with that result. When these kids you see this fall come in and China becomes part of the discussion, where do you direct it?
From discussion meaning with the U.S., as mostly a great power rivalry. So not quite something like Cold War II, but a attempt to make China kind of friendly rise. But throughout history, when there has been a established power and a rising power, they end up in conflict because, and this is the way the world works now, and it's the way that, say, Britain and Germany before World War I, that the U.S. set up a lot of the world to be America-friendly, that things like the World Bank and the IMF, the U.S. has more power than many other countries, than any other country, and especially more than China. And China, of course, doesn't like that. And so they have been pushing at it in all sorts of different directions. And the U.S. has been working to contain China with things like the CHIPS Act, a bipartisan bill that made it where the U.S. was going to boost American computer chip manufacturing and try to hinder China's in various ways, and different political squeezes. So recently the U.S. had the White House hosted the leaders of, I think it was at Camp David, the leaders of South Korea and Japan together, which was a big diplomatic achievement because those countries have a lot of bitterness going back to World War II. And so it was always hard to really get them in a room together, and China saw the U.S. bringing them in a room together as, oh, they're trying to contain China. And, you know, they're not wrong about that.
All right, last question, and we'll let you go. The economy shift in China, the economic pressure they're under, does this affect their ability to support Russia in whatever way they're supporting Russia and Ukraine?
Possibly. But most of what they're supporting Russia with is stuff they're already producing rather than, say, a bunch of new money or things that they are building specially for Russia. So they're doing a lot of indirect things. So there are Chinese commercial drone manufacturers, for example, that sell to anybody around the world, and Russia is buying a whole lot of it. And China will still want to buy Russian oil or gas, and that will get resources for Russia. The political worry is both that China will have some sort of inability to continue delivering growth, and then people will get angry at the government, and then either they'll crack down really hard, or maybe, I don't think this is likely, but maybe do something stupid internationally as a way to try to distract people and rise up nationalism.
Nicholas Grossman, professor, international relations at the University of Illinois, author of Drones and Terrorism. Read it and get 2 copies. You're careless, you'll lose one, and you're going to need to know. Always appreciate you being here, but as far as your class goes, it's still a no.
Well, you know, I can try to talk to some of the bureaucrats here and see what I can do.
You can sit in the back if you don't talk. How about that?
Yeah, I don't do that. Yeah. Can I heckle?
Just observe.
Yeah, you know, actually, I think I'd be okay with heckling. I think I can show the students how, you know, free speech is important and you can interact with people.
You call that a theory? Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being with us. There you go, Professor Grossman again.
Oh, he's awesome.
Professor heckling.
No, you're not. No, you can't do any of that.
Yeah. I remember my first lecture.
Because we actually want to hear what he has to say. You not so much.
Sometimes the show's just for me.